Good evening, I'm Hafiz Marzukhi, and these are our top stories tonight. Rafah crossing reopens with limits, and Iran weighs diplomatic options amid rising US pressure. All that and more coming up on AWANI International. Palestinians have started to re-enter the Rafah border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt after it reopened for the movement of people. The crossing has largely been closed since May 2024 when the Palestinian side was captured by Israeli forces. The reopening is limited and restricted, with Israel requiring security checks. Only dozens of people will be able to cross in both directions each day. Humanitarian aid and commercial goods will still not be allowed through. Rafah is Gaza's only border crossing that does not lead into Israel and serves as a vital lifeline for humanitarian aid and medical evacuations. Long-delayed reopening is a key part of the first stage of US President Donald Trump's ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas, which began in October. Around 20,000 sick and wounded Palestinians are waiting to leave Gaza for treatment. Israeli officials say only 50 patients, each accompanied by 2 relatives, will be allowed to exit daily. Iran says it is reviewing diplomatic options to manage rising tensions with Washington, with hopes for progress in the coming days. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghai confirmed discussions are underway as pressure from the United States continues to build.
The move comes as US President Donald Trump on Sunday played down warnings from Iran's supreme leader of a potential regional war, saying the US has strong military assets in the region but still prefers a deal. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has warned any US attack would trigger a wider conflict. He accused Washington of seeking to seize Iran's oil and gas resources. The US has boosted its naval and air defenses in the Middle East after repeatedly threatening Iran with intervention if it did not agree to a nuclear deal or failed to stop killing protesters. Despite the standoff, both sides have signaled a willingness to return to negotiations, while regional players such as Turkey are pushing for de-escalation.
That's the headline for tonight. More news coming up shortly after the break.
Hamas says it is fully prepared to hand over administrative authority in Gaza to a newly formed Palestinian Technocratic Committee. The US president cannot threaten his way into owning Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark.
Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, led by Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, is poised for a landslide victory in Sunday's lower house election. A survey by the Asahi newspaper shows a strong showing would solidify Takaichi's grip on the party and give her a clear mandate to push expansionary fiscal policies.
The LDP is projected to win more than 233 seats, the threshold for a majority, out of the 465 seats up for grabs in the powerful lower house. That would mark a sharp increase from the 198 seats the party currently holds. Together with its coalition partner, the Japan Innovation Party, the ruling alliance is expected to secure around 300 seats. Meanwhile, the largest opposition group, the Centrist Reform Alliance, is struggling and could lose as many as half of its 167 seats, according to the Asahi. Takaichi's coalition currently holds a slim majority in the lower house, but remains in the minority in the upper house. A landslide victory would strengthen her hand to press ahead with big spending and tax cuts aimed at reviving the economy. Markets have already reacted, with Japanese government bond yields rising on Monday as investors price in the likelihood of a strong electoral mandate.
Russia is not seeking a global conflict, according to a senior Kremlin security official. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, says it was encouraging that contacts with Washington have resumed. However, he warns the West has repeatedly ignored Russian interests and accused Western leaders of escalating global tensions.
When asked about a series of international developments in January, including events in Venezuela and over Greenland, Medvedev said it was all simply too much. He also dismissed claims of a Russian or Chinese threat to Greenland as false horror stories used by the West to justify its own actions. Meanwhile, Ukraine, Russia, and the United States are set to hold a second round of trilateral talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said they are scheduled for February 4th and 5th in Abu Dhabi.
US President Donald Trump says Washington is negotiating with Cuba's leadership to reach a deal, just days after threatening the island with an oil blockade. Trump did not spell out what such an agreement would involve, but the move signals a possible shift after weeks of escalating pressure on Havana.
Well, Cuba's a failing nation. It has been for a long time, but now it doesn't have Venezuela to prop it up. So we're talking to the people from Cuba, the highest people in Cuba, to see what happens.
The United States has moved to block the flow of oil to Cuba after removing Havana's key ally Nicolas Maduro from power and effectively seizing control of Venezuelan oil exports. Trump then threatened to impose additional tariffs on countries that sell oil to Cuba. The Cuban government has accused Trump of seeking to strangle the island's economy, where daily power cuts are intensifying and lines at petrol stations are getting longer.
Meanwhile, Cuba has rejected U.S. claims that it poses a threat to American security, saying it remains ready to cooperate with Washington. In a statement, Havana calls for dialogue and stressed that the Caribbean island does not support terrorism. The response comes after Trump said the United States is negotiating a possible deal with Havana just days after hinting at a virtual oil blockade.
Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte is facing a fresh round of impeachment complaints. The move follows a similar bid last year when rights groups and activists accused her of corruption, betraying public trust and other crimes.
The latest complaints come as Philippine politics remain volatile, with Duterte still locked in a feud with former ally President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. ahead of the next election. Marcos is barred from seeking a second term under the country's one-term limit, but is expected to back a successor in a bid to block Duterte's path to power. The daughter of former President Rodrigo Duterte has been widely seen as a frontrunner for the 2028 presidential election. Civil society and leftist groups filed two separate complaints against her on Monday, including allegations of misusing public funds, bribery, and ignoring congressional inquiries. They also cited her alleged threats against Marcos, the First Lady, and a former House Speaker who is also the president's cousin. Duterte has previously denied the allegations. But unlike last year, this impeachment push will have to clear additional procedural hurdles imposed by the Supreme Court.
Germany will stay closer to the United States than China despite recent tension. Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul says Washington remains crucial to European security and Germany continues to depend on the US even as the relationship faces some strain.
He rejected the idea of pivoting toward Beijing, warning Europe should not expect its problems to disappear by embracing China as a major partner. US President Donald Trump's push for US control of Greenland and criticism of Europe's defense spending has tested transatlantic ties. Trump has since dropped threats of additional tariffs and ruled out taking Greenland by force. But he had previously criticized EU leaders as weak, including calling the bloc irrelevant. Wadephul said Europe is working to diversify its economic ties, with the EU moving to accelerate free trade agreements across the Asia-Pacific, including Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, and Australia.
Singapore is set to launch a national space agency on April 1st, taking a key step into the rapidly growing global space economy. The Ministry of Trade and Industry says it will oversee the new agency, positioning the city-state to play a bigger role in international space development.
According to the ministry, the country's strengths in advanced manufacturing and aerospace, together with capabilities in microelectronics, precision engineering, and artificial intelligence, provide a strong foundation for the development of space technologies. The timing of the move is notable as global investment in space technology reached record levels in 2025, and industry data from Seraphim Space suggests investment is expected to continue rising. The new National Space Agency of Singapore will be responsible for developing and operating national space capabilities. It will also put in place legislation and regulatory frameworks designed to support innovation and enable space-related businesses to grow.
Threats of sweeping American tariffs on Canadian goods are being downplayed by policy analysts who say the rhetoric is political posturing, not an imminent shift in policy. Barrett Bingley of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada says warnings of a 100% tariff are part of maneuvering ahead of scheduled reviews of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, not a concrete plan to disrupt trade.
Bingley said Washington already has a defined withdrawal mechanism under the current agreement, reducing the need for dramatic tariff threats.
It's also useful to remember that under CUSMA, in Article 32.10, the non-market country FTA clause, right? The U.S. or any signatory, but the U.S. has a remedy. If Canada were to sign with a non-market economy, they are able to terminate CUSMA, right? So in fact, the U.S. already has a remedy here. Donald Trump calls that his deal. I think he may possibly have forgotten that they negotiated that part of CUSMA, and it just, I think, speaks to the sort of the general bluster nature of this, as opposed to a seriously considered policy response by the U.S. president.
Tensions escalated after Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney publicly criticized U.S. trade policy at the World Economic Forum, drawing a sharp response from Donald Trump. The U.S. president said Canada relies heavily on Washington and warned of punitive tariffs if Ottawa pursued a separate trade deal with China. That warning was later diffused when Carney clarified that Canada had no plans for a China agreement and would fully comply with its USMCA commitments. The dispute intensified again after Trump announced the decertification of Bombardier jets and threatened steep tariffs unless Canada approved US-manufactured aircraft. Despite the sharp language, Bingley argued that even if a 100% tariff were imposed, the immediate burden would fall on US buyers rather than Canadian producers.
These are the very hard to replace goods, and I would put aluminum and heavy oil in that bucket. You'd have the easier to replace goods, things like auto parts and some agriculture goods, and then the highly replaceable goods where the U.S. may already make the thing. They're in direct competition with their Canadian other Canadian businesses, their Canadian competitors, or they could source from somewhere else, Europe or Japan or China, etc. Right? So in the hard to replace bucket, I think you would initially see the pain being taken by the U.S. buyer. They would be the ones primarily paying the tariff on this.
That concludes AWANI International tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media as well. I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Thank you for watching and good night.